My son walked into my kitchen like he owned the place, which, honestly, I'd started to feel like he thought he did. David had that look on his face, the one he'd worn since he was 12 and thought he knew better than everyone else. But this time, something was different. This time, he had papers in his hand and a smirk that made my stomach drop. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, not bothering to sit down, not even acknowledging the fresh coffee I'd just poured, or the fact that I'd spent my morning cleaning his father's old office, the one he'd been using rent-free for the past 8 years. Before we continue, please write in the comments which country you're listening from. Enjoy the story. I set down my mug, the ceramic making a soft clink against the marble countertop that my late husband Robert and I had saved 2 years to afford. "What's going on, David?" He didn't even look at me when he said it, just stared at those papers like they held the secrets of the universe. "The family business has been sold, Thompson's Corner Cafe. It went for a fraction of what we hoped, but we managed to get something." My heart stopped. Thompson's Corner Cafe, the little restaurant that Robert and I had poured our souls into for 15 years. The place where I'd worked 60-hour weeks while raising 2 children, balancing books until 3 in the morning, serving customers with a smile even when my feet were screaming. The business that was supposed to be our legacy, our children's future. Sold? The word came out as barely a whisper. "What do you mean, sold? When? By who?" David finally looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd been pretending not to notice for months. Something that looked almost like pity. Not the kind of pity you show someone you love who's going through a hard time. The kind of pity you show someone you think is too stupid to understand what's really going on. "Sarah and I have been working on this for months, Mom. The cafe wasn't profitable anymore. We had to make a decision." He set the papers down on my counter, right next to the coffee mug I'd bought for Robert 20 years ago. "Look, we know you put a lot into the place back in the day, so we're giving you $5,000 as a thank you." $5,000. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to break into that grin he used to have when he'd pull pranks on his sister. But his face remained serious, almost businesslike. He was treating me like I was some employee getting a retirement gift, not the woman who had literally built that business from the ground up. 5,000, I repeated, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "I know it's not much, but the sale price was really low. The buyer got it for practically nothing, and there were debts to cover first." He picked up his phone, already moving on to whatever was next on his busy schedule. "You should be grateful, really. Most people in your situation wouldn't get anything." My situation. What exactly was my situation? Being the 68-year-old woman who had worked herself to the bone to build something beautiful, only to watch her own children tear it down without even consulting her? Being the mother who had sacrificed her own dreams, her own comfort, her own future, to make sure her children had everything they needed? I felt something cold spreading through my chest, something that had been building for months, but that I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. It wasn't just hurt, though God knows there was plenty of that. It was the slow, dawning realization that my own children saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their success. "Who bought it?" I asked, my voice steadier now. "Who bought the cafe?" David was already heading toward the door, but he paused, glancing back at me with that same dismissive expression. "Some investment company. Sullivan Holdings, I think. They specialize in buying family businesses that are struggling." Sullivan Holdings. I felt my knees go weak. Sullivan was my maiden name, the name I'd had for 22 years before I became a Thompson. The name that was still on certain documents, certain accounts, certain investments that I'd kept separate over the years. But David didn't know that. Neither did Sarah. In their minds, I was just Mom, the woman who cooked their meals and watched their children and signed whatever papers they put in front of me. They had no idea that Margaret Sullivan still existed, that she'd been quietly building something, while Margaret Thompson played the role of the grateful widow. "Sullivan Holdings," I repeated, testing the words. "Yeah, Some corporate vultures. But hey, at least we got something out of it, right? He was at the door now, car keys already in his hand. I'll transfer the money to your account tomorrow. Maybe you can take a little vacation or something. And then he was gone, leaving me standing in my kitchen with $5,000 worth of papers and the taste of betrayal so bitter I thought I might throw up. I walked to my living room window and watched him drive away in the BMW I'd co-signed for 2 years ago. The BMW he'd never made a payment on. The BMW that was registered to an address, this address, that he'd never bothered to ask if he could use. For 34 years, I'd been Margaret Thompson, devoted wife and mother. I'd sublimated every dream, every ambition, every desire for recognition to the altar of family. I'd made myself smaller and smaller until I was practically invisible, until my own children could sell the business I'd built and offer me pocket change like I should be grateful for their charity. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd forgotten that before I was Margaret Thompson, I was Margaret Sullivan. And Margaret Sullivan had been preparing for this day longer than they could possibly imagine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Thompson's Corner Cafe and how it all began. Not the sanitized version my children had grown up hearing, but the real story. The one where their mother was more than just a supporting character in their father's dream. It was 1987 when Robert came home with stars in his eyes and a business plan scrawled on cocktail napkins. He'd found the perfect location, a corner spot in downtown with big windows and charm that couldn't be bought. The only problem was, we didn't have the money, not even close. We could ask my father for a loan, Robert had suggested, but we both knew his father thought Robert was a dreamer who'd never amount to anything. That's when I stepped in. Not Margaret Thompson, the supportive wife who nodded along with her husband's plans. Margaret Sullivan, the woman who'd been quietly saving and investing since she got her first job at 16. I'd been working as a bookkeeper for 3 different small businesses, juggling ledgers and tax returns while pregnant with David. Most women in 1987 stopped working when they started showing, but I couldn't afford to. Literally. Robert's job at the insurance company barely covered rent, and I was the one keeping us afloat. I have some money saved, I told him that night, pulling out the bank statements I'd been hiding in my jewelry box. Not much, but maybe enough for a down payment. Robert's eyes had gone wide when he saw the numbers. $28,000. In 1987, that was more than his annual salary. Maggie, where did this come from? I've been saving since before we got married, I admitted. My grandmother always told me a woman should have her own money, just in case. Just in case of what? I didn't say it, but we both understood. Just in case your husband dies. Just in case he leaves. Just in case you need to take care of yourself. But I didn't need to take care of myself, I thought back then. I had Robert. I had love. I had a partnership. So I took my carefully saved $28,000, money I'd earned through overtime hours and weekend jobs, money I'd invested in certificates of deposit and small stocks while other women my age were buying new clothes, and I gave it to our dream. Not Robert's dream, our dream. The cafe opened 6 months later, and for the first 3 years, I worked there every single day. I was the morning prep cook, arriving at 5 a.m. to start the coffee and bake fresh muffins. I was the lunch rush waitress when we couldn't afford to hire anyone else. I was the evening bookkeeper, staying until midnight to balance registers and plan inventory. Robert handled the front of house, charming customers with his easy smile and dad jokes. He was good at it, genuinely good at making people feel welcome. But I was the one who made sure we had anything to welcome them with. When David was 3 and Sarah was a baby, I would bring them to the cafe with me. David would nap in a playpen behind the counter while I served customers. Sarah would sleep in her carrier while I chopped vegetables for the next day's soup special. Other mothers judged me for it, whispered about how I should be home with my babies. But what choice did I have? The cafe needed both of us to survive, and it did more than survive. By 1995, Thompson's Corner Cafe was the most popular breakfast spot in town. We'd expanded twice, hired a full staff, and were clearing 6 figures a year in profit. The local newspaper did a feature story about us. Local couple lives the American dream. The photo they ran showed Robert in his chef's apron, arms crossed, standing proudly in front of the grill. I was in the background, barely visible, wiping down tables. The caption read, "Robert Thompson and his wife Margaret have built a thriving family business from the ground up." Robert Thompson and his wife Margaret. Not Robert and Margaret Thompson, business partners. Not the Thompsons, who built this together. Robert Thompson, with his wife Margaret, as an afterthought. I remember staring at that newspaper clipping for a long time. Robert had framed it and hung it in his office, the office that David now occupied. Even then, something inside me had felt wrong about it, but I told myself it didn't matter. We were a team. We were building something for our children. When Robert had his first heart attack in 2003, I was the one who kept the business running. He spent 2 months in recovery, and I worked 18-hour days to make sure our employees got paid and our customers kept coming. When he came back, weaker but determined to keep going, I gradually took on more of the administrative work. By 2010, I was essentially running the entire operation. Robert's health was declining, and though he still came in every day, he spent most of his time sitting at table 12, chatting with regular customers and telling stories about the early days. I didn't mind. I loved seeing him happy, loved watching him hold court with people who'd become like family. But I was the one reviewing profit and loss statements. I was the one negotiating with suppliers. I was the one who decided to expand our catering service, which doubled our revenue in 2 years. I was the one who modernized our point-of-sale system and implemented the inventory management software that streamlined everything. When Robert died in 2016, the lawyer reading his will made it clear that everything was mine. The business, the building, the equipment, all of it. "Your husband was very specific," the lawyer had said. "He wanted to make sure you were taken care of." David and Sarah had been there for that reading. They'd heard those words. But somehow, over the next 8 years, that reality had gotten twisted. Somehow, it became their business. Somehow, I became the aging widow who used to help out but didn't really understand how things worked anymore. When David graduated business school in 2017, he'd come to me with ideas about modernizing operations and implementing new strategies. I'd listened because I wanted to support him, wanted him to feel valued in the family business. When Sarah's husband lost his job in 2019, I'd agreed to put her on payroll as our marketing coordinator, even though her main contribution was posting pictures of our food on Instagram. Slowly, incrementally, I'd let them take over day-to-day operations while I handled the behind-the-scenes work they found boring. Payroll, taxes, vendor relationships, maintenance issues, all the unglamorous stuff that actually kept the business running. But they saw it differently. In their minds, they were the dynamic young leaders dragging an old-fashioned business into the modern era. I was just Mom, the sweet old lady who used to help Dad but didn't really get how business worked in the 21st century. Now, lying in my bed at 2 a.m, I realized they'd never seen me as a partner at all. Not in the business, not in the family, not in anything that mattered. They'd seen me as Robert Thompson's wife, then as David and Sarah's mother. But never, not once, as Margaret Sullivan, the woman who'd built everything they were so eager to tear down. The disrespect hadn't happened overnight. It had been a slow erosion, like water wearing away stone, so gradual that I hadn't noticed until the foundation was completely gone. It started small. David would make decisions about the cafe's menu without consulting me, then present them as fait accompli during our family dinners. "We're dropping the Wednesday special," he'd announce between bites of the pot roast I'd spent 3 hours making. "It's not cost-effective." The Wednesday special had been Robert's favorite creation, a hearty shepherd's pie that drew customers from 3 towns over. But when I tried to explain this, David would wave his hand dismissively. "Mom, that's not how modern restaurants work. We need to focus on profit margins." Sarah was subtler, but no less dismissive. She'd ask me to babysit her twins, Emma and Jake, then disappear for entire weekends. You don't mind, do you, Mom? You're so good with them, and Mark and I really need some couple time. I loved my grandchildren, but watching them meant canceling my book club, skipping my yoga class, and spending my own money on groceries to feed them because Sarah never left enough cash. When I gently mentioned this once, she'd looked at me like I'd suggested drowning puppies. Mom, family helps family. I thought you understood that. Family helps family. The phrase became their catch-all justification for everything they asked of me. When David needed someone to co-sign his BMW lease because his credit wasn't good enough, family helped family. When Sarah's husband Mark got laid off and they couldn't make their mortgage payment, family helped family. When David's wife Rebecca wanted to redecorate their kitchen, but they'd already maxed out their credit cards, family helped family. I helped. I always helped. I signed papers and wrote checks and opened my home to them whenever they needed a place to store furniture or host parties or simply escape from their own responsibilities. My house became their warehouse, their restaurant, their bank, and their hotel, all rolled into one convenient package. The breaking point should have been last Christmas. Sarah had volunteered my house for the entire extended family gathering, 37 people, without asking me first. I found out when Rebecca called to discuss the menu. Sarah said you were making your famous prime rib for everyone. I was thinking we could do a whole themed thing, like a traditional English Christmas. I'd stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the calendar where I'd already marked Christmas Day as a quiet day for myself. I'd planned to visit Robert's grave in the morning, then spend the afternoon reading by the fireplace. 37 people? I'd asked. Well, Mark's whole family is coming, plus David's in-laws, and you know how Sarah loves a big gathering. She said you wouldn't mind. You're such a natural hostess. I minded. I minded that a prime rib for 37 people would cost me nearly $400. I minded that I'd spend 3 days cleaning my house beforehand and another 3 days cleaning up afterward. I minded that Sarah had committed me to hosting without asking, then disappeared to Cabo with Mark, leaving me to handle all the preparations alone. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, "Of course, I'll take care of everything." Because that's what I always did. I took care of everything. The dinner was a success, as my dinners always were. Everyone raved about the food, the decorations, the warm family atmosphere. Sarah posted dozens of photos on social media, tagging herself as the hostess and getting hundreds of likes for her amazing family Christmas. I was in the kitchen washing dishes while everyone else opened presents in the living room. David found me there around 10 that night, elbow deep in soapy water, working through the mountain of pots and pans. "Great party, Mom," he said, loosening his tie. "Rebecca and I are heading out. The babysitter charges extra after 10. He kissed my cheek and left, stepping over the trash bags I'd already filled with wrapping paper and empty bottles. 20 minutes later, Sarah and Mark followed suit, gathering their overstimulated children and their pile of presents. "Thanks for everything, Mom," Sarah called from the doorway. "You're the best. We'll catch up soon, okay?" I stood in my destroyed house, surrounded by the debris of someone else's perfect Christmas, and finally asked myself the question I'd been avoiding for years. When exactly had I become the unpaid help in my own life? The pattern was everywhere once I started looking for it. David using my address for his business mail because it sounded more prestigious than his apartment complex. Sarah dropping her kids off every time they had a cold because Grandma's house is so much more comfortable than daycare. Both of them treating my home like an extension of their own properties, leaving personal belongings in my spare bedrooms and helping themselves to food from my refrigerator without asking. They'd grown up in this house, but somewhere along the way, they'd forgotten that it belonged to me, not them. The financial abuse was even more systematic. David had convinced me to add him as an authorized user on my primary credit card for emergencies. Those emergencies included restaurant dinners with his friends, a new golf club membership, and car repairs that cost more than most people's monthly salary. When the bills came, he'd promised to pay me back when things settled down at work, but somehow things never settled down. Sarah was more creative. She'd borrowed my car so often that her own insurance had lapsed. She'd used my Costco membership to stock up for her own family, then left me to pay the $500 bill. She'd even signed me up as a reference for her husband's business loan without telling me, so when the bank called to verify my income and assets, I was completely blindsided. "Oh, I hope you don't mind," she'd said when I confronted her about it. "I knew you'd say yes anyway, and the paperwork was due that day." Mind? Of course I minded, but by then, minding had become irrelevant. They'd decided what they needed from me, and my feelings about it were just another obstacle to overcome. The final straw should have been David's wedding to Rebecca 3 years ago. I'd offered to pay for the rehearsal dinner as my gift to them, a nice gesture that I thought would cost me maybe $2,000 for a simple family gathering. Instead, I got a bill for $8,000 from the country club Rebecca had chosen without consulting me. Apparently, a simple family gathering included a 7-course plated dinner, premium open bar, and live jazz quartet for 85 guests. "Mom, you're being dramatic," David had said when I expressed shock at the cost. "It's my wedding. This is supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime event." I paid the bill. I always paid the bills. But something had shifted in me that day. Maybe it was seeing the casual way Rebecca dismissed my concerns, or the way David automatically assumed I'd handle whatever financial surprises they threw at me. Maybe it was the realization that they'd stopped seeing me as a person with my own needs and limitations and started seeing me as simply a resource to be managed. Or maybe it was the moment, right after the dinner, when Rebecca pulled me aside and said, "Thank you so much for the lovely party, Margaret. David and I are so grateful to have such a supportive mother-in-law." The pause before supportive had been loaded with meaning. Not loving, not generous, not family, supportive. Like a good piece of furniture that does its job without complaint. 3 weeks before David walked into my kitchen with those papers, I discovered the full scope of their betrayal. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to receive. "Mrs. Thompson? This is Jennifer Walsh from Pinnacle Real Estate. I wanted to follow up on the commercial listing we discussed for Thompson's Corner Cafe." I was folding laundry in my bedroom when the call came. For a moment, I couldn't process what she was saying. "I'm sorry. What listing?" There was a pause. "The sale of your restaurant property? Your son David contacted us 6 weeks ago about putting the building on the market. He said you were all eager to move forward quickly." My hands went numb. The basket of towels I'd been holding crashed to the floor. 6 weeks ago? "Yes, ma'am. We've had quite a bit of interest, actually. The location is prime, and the established business makes it very attractive to investors. David mentioned you might be relocating to Florida? He said that's why you wanted to sell quickly and quietly." I was not relocating to Florida. I had never expressed any desire to relocate to Florida. I had never spoken to anyone about selling the cafe, period. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I managed to say. "Can you tell me exactly what David told you?" Another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm starting to sense there might be some family communication issues here. Would you prefer that I call David directly to clarify?" "No," I said quickly. "No, please don't do that. Can you tell me what the asking price is?" "Well, we listed it at $12 million initially, but we've had an offer of $10 million that David seemed very excited about. He said you'd probably accept anything over $8 million since you just wanted to be done with it." $10 million. I hung up the phone and sat on my bed, staring at the pile of scattered towels on my bedroom floor. $10 million for the business that Robert and I had built with our own hands. The business that was legally mine, according to every piece of documentation in Robert's filing cabinet. And they were planning to give me $5,000 as a thank you. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Robert's funeral. I went into his home office and pulled out every file, every document, every piece of paper related to the cafe. I spread them across his old oak desk, the desk where he'd planned menus and calculated payrolls and dreamed about expanding to a second location. The incorporation papers were there, dated 1987, listing Robert Thompson and Margaret Thompson as equal partners. The deed to the building transferred to Margaret Thompson upon Robert's death in 2016. The business license, renewed annually in my name for the past 8 years. But there were other documents too. Papers I'd signed without reading carefully, because David had presented them as routine business updates. An operating agreement that gave him full management authority over daily operations. A power of attorney that allowed him to make necessary business decisions in the owner's absence or incapacity. I wasn't absent. I wasn't incapacitated. But I had been trusting. The next morning, I called David's office. His secretary, a sweet young woman named Amanda, put me through immediately. "Mom, what's up? I'm in back-to-back meetings all day." "David, I got a strange phone call yesterday from a real estate agent named Jennifer Walsh." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I thought we'd been disconnected. "Mom, I was going to talk to you about that." "Were you? When exactly were you planning to mention that you've been trying to sell my business for 6 weeks?" "It's not just your business anymore, Mom. Sarah and I have put years of work into that place. We've modernized everything, brought in new customers, implemented systems that Dad never could have imagined. With my money, on my property, using my recipes and my suppliers and my 37 years of customer relationships. Mom, you're being emotional about this. The cafe isn't what it used to be. The market has changed. We're losing money every month, and if we don't sell soon, there won't be anything left to sell." I pulled out the profit and loss statements I'd found in Robert's files, the ones David didn't know I still received copies of from our accountant. According to these numbers, we made $460,000 in profit last year. That's the highest we've ever been. Another long pause. "Those numbers they're not accurate, Mom. There are expenses you don't see. Hidden costs. Sarah and I have been covering shortfalls for months." "What expenses? What shortfalls?" "I handle all the vendor payments and payroll. I know exactly what our costs are." "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. We found a buyer who's willing to take the business off our hands and pay us fairly for it. You'll get your share, and then you can finally relax and enjoy your retirement." My share, $5,000 out of $10 million. "David, who is the buyer?" "It's an investment company. They specialize in small businesses like ours." "What's the name of the company?" "Mom, I really don't have time for 20 questions right now. Can we talk about this later?" "What is the name of the company, David?" I heard him sigh, the sound of a man who was tired of dealing with difficult people who didn't understand how the world really worked. "Sullivan Holdings. They're based out of Chicago, and they've been very professional to work with. The sale is scheduled to close next Friday." Next Friday. 6 days away. "And when exactly were you planning to tell me about this?" "I'm telling you now. Look, Mom, I know change is hard, but this is the right decision for everyone. You'll have enough money to travel, maybe buy a little condo somewhere warm. Sarah and I can finally move on with our lives without worrying about keeping an old restaurant afloat." An old restaurant. The business that had paid for his college education, his wedding, his car, his lifestyle for the past 8 years. "I need to go," I said. "Mom, please don't be upset about this. You'll understand once you see the big picture." I hung up without saying goodbye. That afternoon, I drove to the cafe for the first time in 3 months. David had told me I didn't need to come in anymore, that they had everything under control. Now I understood why. The place was bustling, every table full, a line of customers waiting for takeout orders. The Wednesday shepherd's pie was on the menu, along with all of Robert's original recipes and several new items that looked promising. The staff smiled and waved when they saw me, clearly happy to see the boss's mom. I sat in the back corner booth where Robert used to hold court and watched my children work. David moved through the dining room with confidence, greeting regular customers by name, making everyone feel welcome. Sarah managed the register efficiently, her Instagram marketing having clearly paid off in younger customers. They were good at what they did. They'd learned well from watching their father charm people and from watching me build systems that worked. But they weren't owners. They were employees who'd forgotten that someone else signed their paychecks. I pulled out my phone and called the number I'd memorized 20 years ago, but had never needed to use. Sullivan Holdings, this is Patricia speaking. Patricia, this is Margaret Sullivan. I need to make an offer on a property. Patricia's voice was warm and familiar, even though we'd only spoken a handful of times over the years. She'd been managing my investments since 1998, back when I'd first realized I needed someone discreet to handle the money I was setting aside from my cafe earnings. Margaret, it's been too long. How can I help you today? I need to know exactly what I'm worth, I said, sitting in my car outside the cafe. Everything, all accounts, all investments, all properties. And I need to know if I can make a cash offer on a $10 million property by Friday. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of fingers typing on a keyboard. Let me pull up your portfolio. It's been growing nicely, especially with the tech stocks we bought back in 2019. More typing. Okay, here we are. Are you sitting down? I wasn't sure if I wanted to laugh or cry at that question. Just tell me. Your current liquid assets total approximately $14.7 million. That includes your money market accounts, CDs, and the dividend-paying stocks we can liquidate quickly. Your real estate holdings add another $8.3 million. That's the rental properties in Portland, the apartment complex in Seattle, and the 3 commercial buildings in Chicago. $23 million. I sat in my car, staring at the cafe where my children were serving customers and planning to sell my life's work out from under me for pocket change, and realized I was worth $23 million. The Portland properties alone have tripled in value since you bought them, Patricia continued. And remember that pharmaceutical stock we invested in? The one you weren't sure about? It split twice and is now worth almost $2 million on its own. I remembered. It was 2015, and I'd been hesitant to put $50,000 into a small biotech company. Patricia had encouraged me to take the risk, saying I could afford to lose the money if it didn't pan out. Instead, it had become my single most successful investment. How is this possible? I asked. I mean, I know I've been saving and investing, but this much? Margaret, you've been consistently investing $20,000 to $30,000 a year for over 20 years. You've reinvested every dividend, never touched the principal, and you've made some very smart property purchases. Plus, you've had the advantage of time and compound interest. $20,000 to $30,000 a year. Money I'd skimmed from the cafe's profits, money I'd earned from freelance bookkeeping jobs, money I'd saved by living modestly while my children assumed I was just getting by on Social Security and Robert's life insurance. And the answer to your second question is yes, Patricia said. You can absolutely make a cash offer on a $10 million property. Would you like me to start the paperwork? Actually, I have a different question first. I need to know about Sullivan Holdings. Another pause. Sullivan Holdings is your holding company, Margaret. We set it up in 2005 for tax purposes, remember? All of your real estate investments are held under that umbrella. Of course, I'd forgotten that detail. When my portfolio had grown large enough to need more sophisticated management, Patricia had recommended creating a holding company to protect my assets and minimize tax liability. I'd agreed without thinking much about it, trusting her expertise. So when I make an offer through Sullivan Holdings, it's you making the offer. You're the sole owner and president of Sullivan Holdings, LLC. I started laughing then, sitting in my car in the parking lot of my own restaurant, watching my children plan to sell my business to me. The irony was so perfect it felt like something out of a movie. Patricia, I need you to make an offer on Thompson's Corner Cafe in Portland. The asking price is $12 million. But there's already an accepted offer of $10 million. I want to outbid that offer. How high are you willing to go? I thought about David's dismissive tone when he'd offered me $5,000. I thought about Sarah's casual assumption that I'd babysit her children whenever convenient. I thought about 8 years of being treated like hired help in my own business. Offer them $10.5 million, cash, closing by Friday. That's aggressive but doable. I'll need the property details and the listing agent's information. I gave her Jennifer Walsh's number and watched through the cafe window as David emerged from the kitchen, probably checking on the lunch rush. He looked confident, in control, like a man who'd finally gotten his parents' old-fashioned business sorted out. He had no idea his mother was about to buy his inheritance out from under him. "There's something else," I said. "I want this transaction to be completely confidential. The sellers don't need to know who the buyer is until after closing." "Standard procedure for corporate purchases," Patricia assured me. "They'll only deal with our attorneys until the papers are signed." After I hung up, I sat in my car for another 20 minutes, watching the lunch crowd cycle through the cafe. Regular customers I'd served for decades, newcomers drawn in by Sarah's social media marketing, families with children who ordered from the kids' menu Robert had designed 15 years ago. This was my place, not in some sentimental, emotional way, but in every legal and financial sense that mattered. I'd built it, I owned it, and I'd been allowing my children to play restaurant manager while I handled the real business behind the scenes. But they didn't know that. In their minds, they were the savvy young entrepreneurs rescuing a failing family business from their well-meaning but outdated mother. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend Helen, the one person who'd known me since before I became Mrs. Robert Thompson. "Maggie Sullivan," she said when she heard my voice. "I was just thinking about you." Helen was the only person who still called me by my maiden name. She'd been my college roommate, my maid of honor, and my closest friend, until life and geography had pulled us in different directions. We still exchanged Christmas cards and birthday calls, but it had been 3 years since we'd had a real conversation. "Helen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Shoot. Do you think I'm a pushover?" She was quiet for so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Honey, you want the truth?" "Yes. You've been a pushover since you married Robert. Maybe even before that. You're the smartest, most capable woman I know, but you've spent 40 years making yourself smaller so everyone else could feel bigger." It stung, but I'd asked for honesty. "Even in college," Helen continued, "you were the one writing everyone else's papers, covering for everyone else's mistakes, making sure everyone else succeeded even when it meant sacrificing your own opportunities." I remembered. Helen was right. I'd been the responsible one, the reliable one, the one everyone came to when they needed something fixed or handled or simply done right. "But Maggie, you want to know something else?" "What?" "I always wondered what would happen if you ever decided to stop, if you ever decided to put yourself first for once in your life." I looked around my living room, at the family photos covering every surface, at the furniture that had been rearranged to accommodate other people's needs, at the space that had become everyone's second home except mine. "I think I'm about to find out," I said. "It's about damn time," Helen replied. "What's the plan?" And for the first time in years, I realized I actually had one. The next morning, I had 3 meetings that would change everything. First was with Patricia at her downtown office, where we finalized the paperwork for the cafe purchase. Second was with Robert's old attorney, James Morrison, who'd been handling our family's legal affairs for 20 years. Third was with someone I'd never thought I'd need, a private investigator. Patricia's office occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown building I'd driven past thousands of times, but never entered. When the elevator doors opened, I was greeted by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and a receptionist who knew exactly who I was. "Mrs. Thompson, Patricia is waiting for you in the conference room." The conference room was intimidating in its elegance, mahogany table, leather chairs, and a view that made the city look like a toy set spread out below us. Patricia stood when I entered, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that comes from making other people very wealthy. "Margaret, you look wonderful. It's so good to finally meet in person." We'd conducted our business relationship entirely over the phone and through secure emails for 24 years. Seeing her face to face felt surreal, like meeting a character from a book. "I have to admit," she said, spreading documents across the polished table, "when you called about buying the cafe, I was intrigued. It's not often someone asks to purchase their own business back from their children." "They don't know it's me," I said, settling into one of the leather chairs. "They think they're selling to some faceless investment company." Patricia smiled. "Even better. I've prepared the offer. 10.5 million cash, closing Friday. The seller's agent called this morning to accept. Apparently your children were quite excited about the extra 500,000. Of course they were. In their minds, that was 500,000 more dollars they'd managed to squeeze out of the old family business. "There's something else," Patricia continued, pulling out a thick folder. "Since you're making such a significant purchase, I thought you should see the complete picture of your holdings." She spread out property deeds, investment statements, and business documents I'd forgotten existed. The Portland rental properties that had tripled in value, the Seattle apartment complex that generated $40,000 a month in rental income, the Chicago commercial buildings that housed 3 successful restaurants and a boutique hotel. "Margaret, you're not just wealthy, you're what we'd call ultra-high net worth. Your portfolio has been generating approximately $2.3 million annually in passive income alone. $2.3 million a year. More than most people made in a lifetime, and I'd been living like I was scraping by on Social Security. Why didn't you ever tell me the exact numbers?" "Because you never asked," Patricia said gently. "Every time we spoke, you wanted to know if you had enough. Enough for emergencies, enough for your children's educations, enough to feel secure. You never asked how much was enough." She was right. I'd been so focused on having a safety net that I'd never looked to see how big the net had grown. "There's one more thing," Patricia said, sliding a business card across the table. "If you're serious about taking control of your life, you might want to talk to this man, Michael Chen. He's a forensic accountant who specializes in family financial disputes." I pocketed the card without asking why I might need a forensic accountant. Something told me I was going to find out. My meeting with James Morrison was in his familiar office above the hardware store on Main Street. I'd been coming here since Robert and I bought our first house, and the place hadn't changed much. Same oak paneling, same client chairs that had seen better decades, same law books that probably predated the internet. But James looked older, more tired than I remembered. "Margaret, I have to tell you, I've been expecting this call for years." "Expecting what call?" He leaned back in his chair, studying me over his reading glasses. "The call where you finally asked me to explain exactly what David has been doing with the legal documents you've been signing." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" James pulled out a file folder thick with papers. "David has been very busy over the past 3 years. Power of attorney documents, operating agreements, management contracts, all perfectly legal, all properly executed, and all designed to give him control over business decisions while keeping you legally liable for debts and obligations." He spread the papers across his desk like evidence at a crime scene. "This document here gives him authority to make routine business decisions without your approval. This one allows him to enter into contracts up to $50,000 on behalf of the business. And this one is particularly clever, makes him the designated business manager with full authority to negotiate sales, mergers, or acquisitions." "But I own the business." "You do, but you've signed away most of your decision-making authority. In legal terms, you're what we call an absentee owner. You have the liability and financial responsibility, but limited operational control." I felt sick. "James, why didn't you warn me about this when I was signing these documents?" He removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture I recognized from 30 years of consultations. "Margaret, I tried. Every time David brought you in to sign something, I explained what it meant. I asked if you understood the implications. I even suggested you take the documents home to review them before signing." I remembered. I remembered James's careful explanations that I'd half listened to while David tapped his foot impatiently in the corner. I remembered thinking that if David said the papers were routine, they must be routine. I remembered being more concerned about getting home to start dinner than understanding the legal language. "You trusted your son," James said gently. "There's nothing wrong with that. But trust without verification can be dangerous, especially in business relationships. Can any of this be undone?" James smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "Margaret, you're about to own the cafe outright, free and clear, through Sullivan Holdings. Once that sale closes, all of David's management agreements become null and void. He'll be an employee, nothing more. What about the power of attorney documents? Those can be revoked at any time. All you need to do is sign a revocation and file it with the county. I can have that ready by tomorrow morning." I left James's office feeling like I'd been holding my breath for 3 years and could finally exhale. But I had one more stop to make. Michael Chen's office was in a modern building near the university, all glass and steel and the kind of contemporary efficiency that made James's place look like a museum. Michael himself was younger than I'd expected, probably early 40s, with the intense focus of someone who spent his days unraveling other people's financial lies. "Mrs. Thompson, Patricia told me you might be coming by. She said you've been having some family business issues." "I think my children have been stealing from me," I said without preamble. "I just don't know how much or for how long." Michael nodded like this was the most normal thing in the world. Family financial abuse is more common than people think. Children often feel entitled to their parents' resources, especially when those parents have been generous in the past. He pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "Let's start with the basics. Do your children have access to any of your accounts? David is an authorized user on my main credit card. Sarah has my Costco card and my debit card for emergencies. Any joint accounts? David convinced me to add him to my checking account last year. He said it would make it easier for him to help me with bills if I ever got sick." Michael's pen stopped moving. "Mrs. Thompson, how often do you review your credit card and bank statements?" "I get them every month, but David usually handles the reconciliation. He's better with numbers than I am." The look Michael gave me was part sympathy, part professional alarm. "Mrs. Thompson, I think we need to pull your financial records going back at least 3 years. All of them. Credit cards, bank statements, business accounts, everything. How long will that take?" "Give me a week, maybe less if your banks are cooperative." He handed me a contract. "I charge $300 an hour, and this kind of investigation usually runs between $10,000 and $15,000 total." I thought about the $23 million sitting in my accounts, money my children didn't know existed. "Do it," I said. "Find out exactly what they've taken from me." As I drove home that afternoon, I felt like I was seeing my life clearly for the first time in years. The patterns were all there once you knew how to look for them. The casual assumption that my resources belonged to everyone. The legal documents that stripped away my authority while leaving me with all the responsibility. The financial access that had turned into financial abuse so gradually I hadn't noticed it happening. But I was noticing now. And I was about to own my own business again, free and clear. The closing was scheduled for Friday morning. In 3 days, Thompson's Corner Cafe would belong to Sullivan Holdings, which meant it would belong to me, and my children had no idea what was coming. The change started with something small. Wednesday evening, 2 days before the cafe closing, Sarah called with her usual request. "Mom, I hate to ask, but could you watch Emma and Jake this weekend? Mark got tickets to that wine festival in Napa, and you know how hard it's been for us to get away together." I was sitting in Robert's old office, surrounded by financial documents and legal papers, finally understanding the scope of what had been done to me. For the first time in 8 years, the word that came out of my mouth surprised even me. "No." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then a little laugh, like Sarah thought she'd misheard. "What?" I said, "No, Sarah. I can't watch the kids this weekend." "Mom, are you feeling okay? You love spending time with Emma and Jake." I do love spending time with them, but I have other plans this weekend. This was true. I was planning to spend Saturday reviewing Michael Chen's preliminary findings about my financial records, and Sunday meeting with James Morrison to finalize the revocation of David's power of attorney. But Sarah didn't need to know that. What plans? Mom, you never have plans. The casual dismissal in her voice, the assumption that my life was so empty that I should be grateful for any opportunity to be useful, hit me like a physical blow. I'm having lunch with Helen on Saturday, and on Sunday, I'm visiting some properties. This was also true, though I didn't mention that the properties I'd be visiting were ones I already owned and had never bothered to inspect in person. Can't you reschedule? This trip is really important to Mark and me. I'm sure it is, but my plans are important to me. Another silence, longer this time. Mom, this isn't like you. Are you upset about something? I'm not upset. I'm just not available. Fine, Sarah said, and I could hear the irritation creeping into her voice. I guess I'll have to find someone else. I'm sure you will. After I hung up, I sat staring at the phone for 10 minutes. It was such a small thing, declining to babysit for one weekend. But it felt enormous, like I'd just jumped off a cliff and was still falling. Thursday brought an even bigger test. David called while I was reviewing the cafe's employment records, trying to understand how many people actually worked there and what their roles were. Mom, I need a favor. Rebecca's car broke down, and the repair bill is going to be about $4,000. Could you cover it for us? I'll pay you back as soon as the cafe sale goes through. $4,000. A few weeks ago, I would have transferred the money without question, probably with an apology for not offering sooner. What's wrong with the car? I don't know, something with the transmission. The point is, we need the money by tomorrow or they won't start the work. David, you and Rebecca both have jobs. You're about to receive millions of dollars from the cafe sale. Why can't you handle a $4,000 repair bill? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Because we don't have $4,000 just sitting around, Mom. We have expenses, obligations. You know how it is. I did know how it was. I knew they lived in a house with mortgage payments higher than most people's annual salaries. I knew they took vacations to Europe twice a year and sent their children to private schools that cost more than college tuition. I knew they maintained a lifestyle that required constant infusions of other people's money to sustain. Have you considered taking out a personal loan? A loan? Mom, why would I pay interest on a loan when you can just cover it? There it was. The assumption that had been driving our relationship for years. Why should he pay for anything when I could just cover it? Because it's not my car, David. It's not my responsibility. Mom, what is going on with you this week? First, Sarah says you won't watch the kids. Now you're refusing to help with an emergency car repair. This isn't like you at all. Maybe it should be like me. What does that mean? It means maybe I should have been saying no to things that weren't my responsibility a long time ago. David's voice took on the patient tone he used when he thought he was dealing with someone who wasn't quite rational. Mom, family helps family. You taught us that. When people you love need help, you help them. That's what families do. You're right, I said. That is what families do. They help each other. But help should go both ways, shouldn't it? Of course it does. We help you all the time. How? Another pause. What do you mean, how? I mean, how do you help me? When was the last time you or Sarah did something for me that I actually needed without me asking, without expecting something in return? Mom, we include you in everything. We invite you to all our family events. We bring the kids to see you. David, I host those family events. I cook the food, I clean the house, I buy the presents for the kids. You don't invite me to anything, you assign me work. That's not fair. You love doing those things. I do love them. But there's a difference between choosing to do something because you love it and being expected to do it because that's your role. I could hear him getting frustrated now, his voice taking on the edge it got when he couldn't charm his way through a situation. "Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this attitude isn't helpful. We're family. We're supposed to support each other." "You're absolutely right. So here's how you can support me. Handle your own car repair and start thinking of me as someone whose time and money have value." I can't believe you're being this selfish. Selfish, the word that had been used to control me for years. Anytime I hesitated to give something, anytime I expressed a need or preference that conflicted with someone else's wants, I was being selfish. "David, I'm going to hang up now. Good luck with the car repair." I ended the call before he could respond. Within an hour, my phone rang again. This time, it was Rebecca. "Margaret, I just talked to David. I think there might be some miscommunication about the car situation." Rebecca had always been more diplomatic than David, more skilled at making requests sound like favors you'd be happy to grant. "I don't think there's any miscommunication. David asked me to pay for your car repair, and I declined." "But Margaret, we're family, and we've always been able to count on you when we needed help." "Have I been able to count on you?" "Of course. Anytime you need anything, just ask." "When was the last time I asked you for anything, Rebecca?" She was quiet for a moment. "Well, you're so independent. You never seem to need help with anything." Independent. Another word that had been twisted to serve their purposes. I was independent, therefore I didn't need help, therefore they didn't need to offer any. "Rebecca, in the past year, you and David have asked me to co-sign loans, cover emergency expenses, provide free childcare, host family events, and store your belongings in my house. In that same time period, have you ever offered to help me with anything? Have you ever asked if I needed anything? Have you ever considered that I might have emergencies or expenses of my own?" "Margaret, we just assumed you always seem to have everything under control." "I do have everything under control, but that doesn't mean I don't deserve the same consideration you expect from me." "So you're saying you won't help us anymore, ever?" "I'm saying I won't automatically say yes to every request just because we're family. I'm saying you need to start thinking about whether what you're asking is reasonable and whether you've done anything lately to earn my help." That evening, Sarah called back. Her tone was different this time, less confident, more careful. "Mom, David told me about your conversation today. He thinks you're going through some kind of crisis." "What kind of crisis?" "I don't know. Maybe you're feeling unappreciated? Because that's not true, Mom. We appreciate everything you do for us." "How do you show that appreciation, Sarah?" "We tell you thank you. We include you in our lives. We care about you. But you don't respect my time, my money, or my right to make my own decisions." "That's not true." "Sarah, when was the last time you asked me if I wanted to babysit before assuming I would? When was the last time you offered to pay me for the groceries I buy to feed your children? When was the last time you considered that I might have plans before volunteering my house for a family gathering?" "Mom, you've never acted like any of that bothered you. That's because I've been afraid that if I said anything, you'd stop including me in your lives at all." There was a long pause. "Is that what this is about? You want us to pay you for babysitting?" "Sarah, I want you to think of me as a person with my own needs and limitations, not as a resource that exists for your convenience." "Of course we think of you as a person." "Do you? Or do you think of me as Mom, the woman whose job it is to make your lives easier?" She didn't answer right away, and in that silence, I heard the truth she couldn't bring herself to say. I was Mom. I was the woman whose job it was to make their lives easier. And I had been doing that job so well for so long that they'd forgotten I was anything else. But I was about to remind them. Friday morning arrived with 3 phone calls before 9 a.m. The cafe closing was scheduled for 11, and my children were in full panic mode. The first call was from David, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Mom, we need to talk. Right now. I'm coming over." "I'm not available right now, David. I have an appointment this morning." "Cancel it. This is more important." No, it's not. Mom, stop playing games. I don't know what's gotten into you this week, but you're acting crazy and it's affecting our whole family. How is it affecting your family? Rebecca had to take the day off work to deal with the car situation because you wouldn't help us. Sarah had to cancel her weekend plans because you suddenly decided you're too busy to watch your own grandchildren. And now you're being difficult about a simple family conversation. David, those aren't my problems to solve. They are when your behavior is causing them. My behavior? You mean my refusal to automatically pay for your expenses and provide free labor on demand? I mean your sudden decision to abandon your family when we need you most. The manipulation was so blatant it took my breath away. I'd said no to 2 requests in 40 years of saying yes to everything, and now I was abandoning my family. I'll talk to you after my appointment, I said, and hung up. The second call came 20 minutes later, from Sarah. She was crying. Mom, I don't understand what's happening. David says you're refusing to help with anything anymore. Emma keeps asking why Grandma doesn't want to see her this weekend. The guilt hit exactly where Sarah intended it to. My grandchildren were innocent in all this, and the thought of them feeling rejected because of adult conflicts made my chest ache. Sarah, this has nothing to do with Emma and Jake. I love spending time with them. Then why won't you watch them this weekend? Because I have other plans, and because you never asked if I was available. You just assumed I would be. But you're always available. You've never had other plans before. Maybe that's the problem. Mom, I'm scared. You're acting like you don't love us anymore. More manipulation, but this time it came with real tears. Sarah had always been the more emotional of my 2 children, more likely to cry when she didn't get her way. Of course I love you, but love doesn't mean I have to say yes to everything you ask. It does in our family. It always has. Then maybe our family has a problem. Sarah's crying got louder. Mom, please, I don't know what we did wrong, but whatever it was, we're sorry. Can't we just go back to normal? Normal. The word that meant I paid for everything, provided free labor, and kept my mouth shut about being taken advantage of. Sarah, I need to go. We'll talk later. Mom, wait. I hung up. The third call came as I was walking to my car. Rebecca's number flashed on the screen. Margaret, I think we need to have a family meeting. This situation is getting out of hand. What situation? Your sudden hostility toward your own children. David is beside himself. Sarah is in tears. And frankly, I'm worried about your mental state. My mental state. Now I was crazy for refusing to bankroll their lifestyle. Rebecca, there's nothing wrong with my mental state. I'm simply declining to fulfill every request that gets made of me. But that's what families do for each other. When someone needs help, everyone pitches in. When was the last time you pitched in to help me with something? Margaret, you don't need help. You're financially secure, you don't have young children to worry about, and you have plenty of free time. How do you know what I need? Have you ever asked? Well, no, but have you ever offered to help me with anything? Yard work, house maintenance, grocery shopping, anything? You've never asked for help. Neither have you. But that doesn't stop you from expecting it. Margaret, I think you're having some kind of breakdown. Maybe you should talk to someone, a counselor or therapist. Maybe you should ask yourself why you think a woman is having a breakdown simply because she's stopped giving you money. I arrived at the law office 20 minutes early, my hands shaking from the morning's phone calls. James Morrison took one look at me and poured coffee without asking. Rough morning? My children think I'm having a mental breakdown because I said no to a few requests. Ah, the pushback phase. It's completely predictable when someone starts setting boundaries after years of not having any. Is it always this ugly? Usually. People who've been benefiting from someone else's lack of boundaries rarely accept the change gracefully. At exactly 11 a.m., I sat in the law office conference room and watched Patricia's attorney finalize the sale of Thompson's Corner Cafe to Sullivan Holdings. The seller's attorney, representing David and Sarah, was a young man who seemed slightly overwhelmed by the amount of money changing hands. "Your clients must be very pleased with this outcome," Patricia's attorney said. "It's not often a small family business sells for this much above market value." "They're thrilled," the young man replied. "They were expecting maybe $8 million at most. Getting $10.5 million is like winning the lottery for them." Like winning the lottery. With my money. For my business. I signed the papers as president of Sullivan Holdings, using the maiden name my children had forgotten I ever had. Within 30 minutes, I owned Thompson's Corner Cafe free and clear. The business that Robert and I had built, that I'd nurtured for 37 years, was mine again. But my children still didn't know. That afternoon, David showed up at my house without calling first. I watched him through the front window, pacing on my porch like a caged animal, before finally opening the door. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into my living room. "You could have called first." "I did call. 3 times. You didn't answer. Because I was busy." "Doing what? What could you possibly be busy with that's more important than your family?" I almost laughed. If only he knew that I'd been busy buying his livelihood out from under him. "David, sit down." "You're making me nervous." He didn't sit. Instead, he stood in the middle of my living room, hands on his hips, looking every bit like the entitled child he'd apparently never stopped being. "Mom, I don't know what's going on with you, but this has to stop. You're hurting people. Sarah cried for 2 hours after your phone call this morning." "What exactly did I say that was hurtful?" "You're acting like we're strangers. Like we're people who just show up demanding things from you instead of your children who love you." "David, in the past month, how many times have you contacted me just to see how I was doing, with no agenda, no request, no favor to ask?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "How many times have you invited me to do something I might enjoy, rather than asking me to do something you needed?" Another pause. "How many times have you offered to help me with anything?" "Mom, that's not fair. You don't need help." "How do you know what I need?" "Because you never ask for anything." "Neither do you, David, but you expect it anyway." "That's different." "How?" Because we're your children. It's different when children need help from their parents. You're 32 years old. You have a college degree, a successful business, and a working wife. At what point do you stop being a child who needs help and start being an adult who provides it? So that's it? Now that we're adults, you just stop caring about us? I didn't say I'd stop caring. I said I'd stop automatically providing whatever you ask for without question. David started pacing again, his frustration building to something that looked dangerously close to rage. "This is insane, Mom. You're talking like we're parasites or something, like we've been using you." Haven't you? We're family. Using each other is what families do. Is it? Because it seems like the using only goes one direction in our family. That's because you're the parent. That's how it works. Parents take care of their children. For how long, David? Until you're 40, 50, until I die? Until you don't need to anymore? And when will that be? When will you not need me to pay for your emergencies, host your parties, and watch your children? He stopped pacing and stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Mom, what has gotten into you?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and sacrificed for and loved with everything I had, and realized he genuinely couldn't understand why I might want something different than what we'd always had. In his mind, our relationship was perfect. He got everything he needed, and I got the privilege of providing it. What could be wrong with that? "David, the cafe sale closed today." His face lit up with the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all week. "Really? How much did we end up getting?" Even now, even after everything, he still saw my business as his inheritance. $10.5 million. Holy shit, Mom. That's incredible. Do you realize what this means? You'll never have to worry about money again. Neither will any of us. Neither will any of us. He was already spending money that he thought belonged to him. "David, Who do you think bought the cafe? Some investment company called Sullivan Holdings. Why? I smiled for the first time in days. Just curious. The confrontation came on Sunday evening. David had spent the weekend making plans for his windfall, calling Sarah every few hours to discuss how they'd split the money and what they'd do with their newfound wealth. I knew this because Sarah called me Saturday morning, breathless with excitement. "Mom, can you believe it? $10.5 million. David thinks we should each take about $5 million and give you the rest. Isn't that generous? Give me the rest, out of the sale of my own business." Very generous, I'd said. David's already looking at houses in the hills, and Mark and I are thinking about maybe buying that little vacation place we looked at in Tahoe. With this kind of money, we could really start living the way we've always dreamed. The way they'd always dreamed. On my money, from my business, using my life's work to fund their fantasies. Sunday evening, they both showed up at my house with champagne and Chinese takeout, ready to celebrate our family success. Rebecca came too, along with Sarah's husband Mark, and all 4 grandchildren. It was like a party, everyone giddy with excitement about money they thought they were about to receive. "Mom, you look tired," Sarah said, setting containers of food on my dining room table without asking. "Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine, just thinking." "About what?" "About the future." David popped the champagne cork with a flourish. "Well, you don't have to worry about the future anymore. With your share of the cafe money, plus your Social Security, you'll be completely set for life." My share, my Social Security. They had no idea I was worth more than all of them combined. "David, before we celebrate, I have something to tell you." "Sure, Mom. But first, let's toast." He started pouring champagne into glasses he'd found in my cabinet. "To family, and to new beginnings." "Actually, let's hold off on the toast. We need to talk about the sale." "What about it?" Sarah asked, helping herself to lo mein noodles. "Everything went smoothly, right? The lawyer said all the paperwork was finalized." "It was. But there's something you don't know about the buyer." David waved his hand dismissively. "Who cares about the buyer? Some corporate investment group with more money than sense. The important thing is, we got top dollar for the place." "The buyer wasn't a corporate investment group." "What do you mean?" Rebecca asked, looking up from her phone where she'd been browsing real estate listings. "I mean, Sullivan Holdings isn't what you think it is," David laughed. "Mom, you don't understand how these things work. These big investment companies use generic names like that to hide their real identities. It's totally normal." "You're right. It is normal. But Sullivan Holdings isn't a big investment company." "Then what is it?" Sarah asked. I looked around my dining room at my children and their spouses, at my grandchildren playing with toys on my carpet, at the people who'd spent 8 years treating me like their personal ATM and unpaid servant. "Sullivan Holdings is my company." The room went completely silent. David's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean, your company?" Sarah asked. "I mean, I own Sullivan Holdings. I created it 20 years ago to manage my investments and property holdings." David set down his glass slowly. "Mom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I bought the cafe. From you. I bought my own business back." "That's impossible," Rebecca said. "You don't have that kind of money." I walked to Robert's old desk and pulled out the portfolio summary Patricia had prepared for me. $23 million in assets, laid out in neat columns with bank logos and account numbers. "Actually, I do." David grabbed the papers, his eyes scanning the numbers with the intensity of someone who'd spent years managing other people's money. His face went white. "This can't be real." "It's very real. I've been saving and investing for over 30 years. Quietly, carefully, successfully." Sarah was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. "Mom, where did all this money come from?" "From me. From my work, my sacrifices, my investments. From the cafe profits you thought you were managing. From the rental properties I bought with money I saved. From smart investments I made when you thought I was just sitting around waiting to be useful." But you live like... David struggled to find words. You clip coupons. You buy generic groceries. You drive a 10-year-old car. Because I choose to. Because I learned a long time ago that spending money to impress people is stupid. Because I wanted to build something real instead of just looking successful. Mark, who'd been silent through this entire exchange, finally spoke up. So when we sold the cafe to Sullivan Holdings, you sold it to me, at a very fair price, I might add. I probably could have gotten it for $8 million, but I didn't want you to feel cheated. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I'd paid my own children extra money for the privilege of buying back my own business. David was studying the investment statements with growing comprehension and horror. Mom, this says you own the building where our apartment is. I do. I bought that property in 2018. You've been paying rent to my property management company for 5 years. And this one? This is the apartment complex where Mark and Sarah live. Also mine. I bought it in 2019 when the previous owner was facing foreclosure. Sarah's face had gone from confusion to something approaching panic. Mom, are you saying we've been paying you rent all this time? Indirectly, yes, though you've never actually met your payment obligations on time. My property management company has had to waive late fees for you 17 times in the past 2 years. Rebecca was frantically scrolling through the documents on her phone, cross-referencing addresses and property records. David, she's telling the truth. Look at this. She owns half the commercial district downtown. Including the building where David's office is, I added, and the parking garage where you all park, and the coffee shop where you meet your friends. David looked like he was going to be sick. Mom, why didn't you tell us? Because you never asked. Because you assumed I was just getting by on Social Security and your father's life insurance. Because it was easier to let you think I needed your help than to deal with your expectations about what I should be doing with my money. But we could have. We would have. Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. You would have what? Treated me with respect? Valued my opinions? Stopped assuming I existed solely to make your lives easier? We never assumed that, David protested. Didn't you? When was the last time you asked what I wanted instead of telling me what you needed? The room was quiet except for the sound of my 4-year-old grandson Jake playing with his toy cars, oblivious to the fact that his entire family's world had just been turned upside down. So, what happens now? Rebecca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now you understand that the cafe was never yours to sell. It was mine. It's always been mine. And now it's mine again, legally and completely. But what about our money? Sarah asked. What about the $10.5 million? That money went to the previous owners of the cafe, you and David. But you said you bought it back. I did. I bought it from you. You got the money, fair and square. But now the cafe belongs to me again, and all those management agreements and power of attorney documents David had me sign are null and void. David was slowly realizing the implications. So we don't work there anymore? Not unless I decide to hire you, which I might. But you'd be employees, not owners. You'd have to earn your positions like anyone else. Mom, this is crazy, Sarah said, tears starting to flow. You can't just take away our livelihoods. I'm not taking anything away. I'm taking back what was always mine. The cafe, the building, the business relationships, the customer base, all of it belongs to me. It always has. But we put years of work into that place. So did I. 37 years to be exact, and unlike you, I never got paid for it. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against my hardwood floor. This is insane. You're destroying our family over money. I'm not destroying anything. I'm setting boundaries. I'm reclaiming my property and my dignity. Your dignity? Mom, we've always treated you with respect. I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. David, you offered me $5,000 for a business worth $10 million. You've spent years telling me I don't understand how modern businesses work while running my business into debt. You've used my credit, my property, and my money like they belong to you. Because we thought you wanted to help us. I did want to help you. But help should be a gift, not an expectation. And it should go both ways. Rebecca was gathering her purse and the children's things, clearly wanting to escape before things got worse. David, we should go. No, David said firmly. We're not leaving until we figure this out. Mom, what do you want from us? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be strong and independent, who'd somehow become entitled and manipulative instead. I want you to understand that I'm not your employee, your bank, or your servant. I'm your mother, and I deserve the same respect you'd give any other person whose money and time you want. So that's it? You're cutting us off? I'm treating you the way you've been treating me, as people who have to earn what they get. Sarah was crying openly now. Mom, please, we're sorry. We didn't realize. We didn't mean to. I know you didn't mean to. That's what makes it worse. You took advantage of me so casually, so automatically, that you didn't even notice you were doing it. David's face was red with anger and embarrassment. Fine. You want to play hardball? We can play hardball. But don't expect us to come crawling back when you realize you've destroyed the most important relationships in your life. David, I said quietly, if the only relationships you're willing to have with me are ones where you get whatever you want and I get nothing, then they're not relationships worth preserving. He stormed out, Rebecca and the children trailing behind him. Sarah lingered for a moment, looking lost and confused. Mom, I don't understand any of this. I thought we were happy. I thought our family was good. Our family was convenient, Sarah. For you. But it wasn't good for me. So what happens now? I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised to be strong and independent, who'd somehow learned to be helpless and demanding instead. Now you learn to live without my money. And maybe, if you can do that with grace and dignity, we can build something better. After they left, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the debris of their celebration dinner, and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Peace. 6 months later, I stood in the cafe at 6 a.m., watching the morning prep crew work with the efficiency Robert and I had always dreamed of. The place hummed with activity, fresh coffee brewing, pastries coming out of the oven, servers setting up for the breakfast rush that would start in an hour. But this time, I wasn't the one doing all the work. This time, I was the owner, the boss, the person everyone turned to for decisions. And it felt incredible. The first month after the revelation had been brutal. David and Sarah didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. Rebecca blocked my number. Mark sent me a long email explaining how disappointed he was in my vindictive behavior. The grandchildren asked their parents why Grandma was being mean to everyone, but I held firm. I'd spent too many years being a doormat to go back to that life now. The breakthrough came when Sarah showed up at my house on a Tuesday morning, looking tired and humble in a way I'd never seen before. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. Have we really been as awful as you say we have? I poured her coffee and sat across from her at my kitchen table, the same table where this whole journey had started with David's announcement about the cafe sale. Sarah, let me ask you something. In the past 6 months, how has your life changed? Everything's harder. Mark and I are having problems because we're stressed about money. We had to move to a cheaper apartment. I had to get a real job instead of just posting pictures on Instagram. The kids have been asking why we can't do things we used to do. And how do you feel about that? Terrible. Scared. Like we don't know how to be adults. That's not because you're bad people, Sarah. It's because you never learned to take care of yourselves. You went from depending on your father to depending on me without ever developing independence. She was quiet for a long time, turning her coffee mug in her hands. Mom, I found something when we were packing up the apartment. She pulled out a shoebox filled with birthday cards, Christmas cards, and thank you notes I'd sent her over the years. Cards she'd apparently saved but never really read. I was going through these and I realized something. You never asked for anything, not once. Every card was about how proud you were of me, how much you loved me, how happy you were about my achievements. But you never mentioned your own life, your own needs, your own dreams. I didn't think you'd be interested. That's the problem, isn't it? I never gave you any reason to think I'd be interested. We talked for 4 hours that day. Really talked. Maybe for the first time since she was a child. I told her about the loneliness of the past 8 years, about feeling invisible in my own family, about watching my children become people I didn't recognize. She told me about the pressure she'd felt to keep up appearances, about how dependent she'd become on my support, about how scared she was to try living without it. David took longer to come around. He showed up at the cafe one morning, dressed in a suit like he was going to a job interview. "Mom, I'd like to apply for a position." "What kind of position?" "Whatever you think I'm qualified for." I hired him as an assistant manager, not the general manager he'd been playing at for years, but a real position with real responsibilities and a salary that reflected his actual contribution. He had to work his way up, had to prove himself to employees who'd watched him play boss while I did the real work. It was humiliating for him at first. Several of the longtime staff members made it clear they remembered who'd really been running things all those years. But David was smart and capable when he wasn't coasting on entitlement, and within 3 months he'd earned genuine respect. Sarah took a job as our social media coordinator. A real job with actual goals and measurable results, not the vanity position she'd held before. She had to learn about marketing budgets, customer engagement, and return on investment. It was the first time in her adult life that she'd been held accountable for her work. The changes in both of them were remarkable. David started coming up with genuinely innovative ideas for expanding the business. Sarah developed real skills and began talking about maybe going back to school for a marketing degree. They both started treating me like a person whose opinions mattered, whose time had value, whose approval had to be earned. But the biggest change was in me. For the first time in decades, I was living my own life instead of simply facilitating everyone else's. I renovated the cafe, updating the kitchen, and expanding the seating area. I hired a full staff so I didn't have to work 18-hour days. I bought new furniture for my house and redecorated it to reflect my tastes instead of being a museum to Robert's memory, and a playground for my grandchildren. I started traveling, something I'd always wanted to do, but had never made time for. I spent 2 weeks in Italy, learning to cook from nonnas who'd been perfecting their recipes for 70 years. I visited Helen in California, and we laughed until we cried about all the years I'd wasted being afraid to disappoint people. Most importantly, I started saying what I thought instead of what I thought people wanted to hear. When David suggested a business idea that wouldn't work, I told him why instead of nodding and letting him figure it out on his own. When Sarah asked for my opinion on her relationship problems, I gave honest advice instead of just offering sympathy. When the grandchildren misbehaved at my house, I set boundaries instead of cleaning up after them in silence. The family dinners were different now, too. Instead of me cooking for everyone while they relaxed, we had potluck meals where everyone contributed. Instead of me hosting every holiday, we rotated houses. Instead of conversations revolving around what people needed from me, we talked about books, politics, travel plans, and dreams. Rebecca and Mark took the longest to adjust. They'd been so accustomed to treating me like a walking checkbook that they struggled with the new dynamic. But eventually, they realized that the woman who'd been subsidizing their lifestyle had been replaced by someone more interesting. A woman with her own opinions, her own resources, and her own expectations about how she deserved to be treated. The financial audit Michael Chen completed had been devastating in its thoroughness. Over the past 8 years, my children had cost me nearly $400,000 in direct support. Loans that were never repaid, expenses they'd asked me to cover, co-signed debts they'd defaulted on. But the emotional cost had been much higher. I'd lost myself in the process of taking care of everyone else. I'd become so focused on being needed that I'd forgotten how to have needs of my own. The cafe was thriving now, generating more profit than it ever had under David and Sarah's management. But more than that, it felt like mine again. I'd reclaimed not just the business, but my identity as someone who built things instead of just funding them. Standing there that morning, watching my employees, including my children, work together to create something beautiful, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. This was what success looked like. Not enabling other people's dreams, but achieving your own. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, my oldest granddaughter, now 12 and wise beyond her years. "Grandma, thank you for teaching Mom and Dad to be grown-ups. Our family is better now." Out of the mouths of babes. I looked around the cafe one more time at the business Robert and I had built, that I'd saved, that I'd reclaimed. The morning rush was starting, and the place would soon be filled with customers who came here not just for the food, but for the atmosphere of genuine warmth and competence that had taken decades to create. This was my legacy. Not the money I'd accumulated, not the properties I owned, but the life I'd built through my own choices and my own work. A life where I was valued not for what I could provide, but for who I was. Margaret Sullivan Thompson, business owner, mother, grandmother, and finally, after all these years, a woman who knew her own worth. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story touched you, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Stay healthy and value yourselves.